Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third session of our summer series, which is about donor identity and how it could transform your supporter journeys. Right now, you know what your supporters are, for example, their age or their gender, which is descriptive information, and it reveals nothing about who they are or why they're supporting you. And people support you not because you asked them, but because of who they are. People give to a specific cause because that cause reflects who they are and it gives them a chance to reaffirm their values and beliefs. So any messages that mirror their identity will capture their attention and will increase chances of support. Now, in the previous session, Stefano talked about personality, which is another way to get to know who your supporters are and speak to them. Today, I'll show you how you could tailor messages based on identity. But first, a very brief recap on identity for those who are new. Every one of us has many different identities. Some we're born with, like our nationality, for example. Some we choose, like the decision to be a parent or our profession. And some identities are imposed on us, experience with hunger or suffering from a disease. Now, each of these identities are linked with specific values, beliefs, and goals, and they affect our behavior. Not all of these identities are active at the same time, but the identity that is active is influencing our behavior in a way that is consistent to its values and beliefs. And it's very easy to prime an identity which is not active and bring it front to mind. Like right now, my professional identity is activated because of the context, and that is affecting my behavior. But it's very easy with a word or an environmental cue for another identity to become active, and then that could influence my behavior. Now, when talking about donor identity, we refer to a specific identity which provides some connection to your cause. It's the part of the donor and her values that align with your organization values and goals. This donor identity will, of course, be different for different organizations, but as fundraisers, our job is to discover them so we can prime them in order to increase engagement and giving. Right now, that's how donor identity shows on your CRM. It's non-existent, it's invisible. Instead, you have segments that are based on channel, like face-to-face or digital, or segments based on value, mid-level donors, for example, or segments based on recency, 0 to 12 months, lapsed donors, etc. That's all good, but they don't tell you why people support you. And more importantly, none of these segments inform you how you should be talking to these people differently in order to increase their value. Giving through a different channel or just because I'm lapsed and you're active doesn't require different content. But if you and I have different identities, that's a different story. As an example, here is how your CRM should look like if you captured identity. This is from a health organization and it shows connection to the disease or connection to the organization itself because it provides services. Now, that's the only segmentation that matters. Why? Because identity tells you what offers are relevant for each segment and tells you how you should speak to each segment. As an example, take these 3 quotes. They represent 3 completely different donor identities. In the middle, you have someone with direct experience with the disease and the charity. On the right, you have someone with no experience with the disease. Knowing this, would you speak to the 2 people the exact same way? I mean, it'd be insensitive, if nothing else, if you try to explain what the disease feels like to the person who's lost their mother from it. But this is exactly what's happening currently. There is no room in the current fundraising model for identity. Looking at the stuff that goes out, everyone receives the same content. Well, maybe higher value donors receive the same content in higher quality paper. But still, everyone is treated the same, and that's a problem. If the material you send doesn't speak to who your supporter is, then sooner or later they'll walk. And you know this firsthand, retention hasn't been great in years. So bringing more people in won't solve anything, because eventually they'll walk out too, and the vicious cycle continues. To break it, we need to do things differently. We need to change how we segment the donor file. Here's an organization's old segmentation, which was based on the acquisition method. Now, the commitment score mentioned here is our proprietary measure of donor loyalty, and the higher it is, the higher the value supporter, the higher the value of that supporter should be. And the score goes from 0 to 10. But here what you see is the segment with the higher value, those acquired with a direct mail, they are also the segment with the lowest commitment score. How is that possible? Because this segmentation isn't based on why people give. This segmentation is random. Instead, when we segmented the same file based on connection to the disease, the identity, you can see that everything falls into place. The supporters with a direct connection to the organization and the cause are the ones with the highest commitment score and are the ones who are worth more to the organization. Supporters with no connection to the cause are the ones who are worth less to the organization, and they have the lowest commitment score. This is happening right now in all your organization's files, and it's just that it's invisible to you because we segment the file based on these other random factors. But if we want different results, we need to do things differently. And unless we start segmenting and tailoring differently, we won't be able to increase engagement, value, or retention. This is a screenshot showing our proposed new way of segmentation. We'll get into the details of this journey in a minute, but for now, at the top level, this new approach acknowledges there are different identity segments with different values and goals, and it recognizes that they need to be treated differently, which means different offers and different copy. Let's see the value identity offers in practice. You saw the previous table with the giving levels and commitment scores. That gave you a hint, but let's see some more examples from the field. Now, this is data from another health organization validating our previous conclusion that the stronger the connection to the cause, the higher the value. The direct to charity means that these supporters have been helped by the organization. Direct to cause means these supporters had suffered from that disease. So it's worth emphasizing here that these differences exist before the organization did anything to prime the identity. Just because that connection exists, it dictates how much I will give, and as we'll see later, whether I'm going to stick around or not. Same pattern of results with another client, this time a human rights organization. The identity that matters in this case is activist identity. As expected, supporters who identify strongly as activists have a higher commitment score to the organization, and they give more. The bars represent average lifetime value, while the line represents average monthly gift. And again, all this is before we do anything to prime the identity. Just because these identities exist, we see different commitment scores and different giving levels. Now, let's see what happens when we actually do something about it, when we try to prime identity. Let's start with acquisition. I'll share a couple of Facebook ad examples, but the same logic can be, the same strategy can be adopted by other channels. In any acquisition efforts, there are two things you need to do. You need to target the right people, the people with the relevant identity, and then you need to send to them messages that match that identity. The first example is from a UK client. We had already finished an insights project that uncovered their supporters' identity. This is a charity helping homeless people, so the identity isn't as obvious as with a health organization. Still, there is one. And what our insights work uncovered was that identity is an increased sense of responsibility towards people who are less fortunate. So next, we wanted to test priming that identity to see if we could increase giving. So we used Facebook ads, and first we targeted people that we knew would have that helper identity. So we targeted people who supported other homeless charities, international work, which our insights work showed that are likely to be what we call helpers. So next, we created 3 ads. We had a control ad that used the standard message that the organization was using, asking people to help someone leave homelessness behind for good. And the first test ad used the exact same copy with one change. We added become a homeless helper today. So we're just priming that identity with just a label. The second test ad was digging a bit deeper into that helper identity by using a message that matches the belief underlying the identity. If it's important to you to help troubled people with their problems, please become a homeless helper today. And the rest was the same as the control. Click-through rates went through the roof just by the addition of the homeless helper label. And it went further up with the additional identity message. The second example is from a US client, a conservation charity. In this case, we wanted to test how an identity-based ad would perform against their traditional, very strong premium offer. So again, we targeted people with the relevant identity, conservationists and environmentalists, and we showed them 2 ads. The control was the premium offer, donate and get this jacket. And we compared that against an identity ad that was all about protecting nature and protecting the wetlands. As a conservationist, you know how important the wetlands are, how important clean water, and so forth. The identity-based message was as strong as the premium offer. Now, you know from experience how difficult premium offers are to beat. So having an ad that has no premium and it's just tailored based on identity, resulting in the same conversion rate as a premium ad is pretty good. Now, an important note, this result is with a new audience, completely new supporters who have no prior experience with the premiums that this charity offers. Because people acquired with a premium might be different by different motives. And worse, they may have learned to expect it. So it's a completely different kettle of fish. Starting fresh, though, you can acquire people by speaking to their inner motives as successfully as you used to acquire people by speaking to their extrinsic motives, premiums. Okay, what about other kinds of conversion? The logic is the same. You find out who you're talking to, and then you tailor the message accordingly. Again, I'll share 2 examples. In the first one, we wanted to convert people who responded to a Facebook petition. As part of that petition signing, they had to answer an identity question. The relevant identity for this organization was whether they were horse or dog lovers. And right after, we sent them an email asking them to donate. And some people received an email that matched their identity. So horse lovers received the top one, the help horses ask, whereas dog lovers received the bottom one, help dogs. But there was a third group that received the dog email, all of them, regardless of what they identified with. And looking at results, you can see that when we used the same email to everyone, there was a drop in click-through rates and an increase in the unsubscription rate. The second arrow should be pointing upwards. Sorry about that. The second example is from a UK conservationist charity. Once again, we had completed an insights project that uncovered identity. And in their case, there was a split between nature enthusiasts or bird enthusiasts. Like there were people on file who, if you weren't talking to them about birds, they switched off. So knowing this, we introduced the identity question in an inbound call asking them to become a member. So the conversation started with, can I ask you what best describes you? Are you a bird enthusiast or nature enthusiast or neither? And based on their responses, we tailored the ask, the membership ask accordingly. So to bird lovers, we talked all about how they could be saving birds. And when we were talking about the benefits of the membership, we emphasized bird watching opportunities and anything else that had to do with birds. And we did something similar for nature lovers. By doing this, we increased conversion by 15% and donor value by £10. That's a UK client. Okay, so we covered what affects the decision to donate, but what about the decision to give again or to stay? What affects that? That's when emotions come into play. For every decision we make, emotions function as feedback on what we just did. And the way we feel afterwards determines whether we repeat that action or not. In the same way, how donors feel after they give will determine whether they stick around or not. And feelings have to do obviously with the experience itself, but they also have to do about how they felt, how we made them feel rather about their identity and whether they felt that the organization knows who they are. Looking at the retention data from that health organization, we can see that connection to the cause doesn't only affect value, but it also affects retention. Supporters with higher connection, direct connection to either the organization or the cause, have higher retention to people with no connection. Again, this happens before the organization does anything to reinforce identity, before any changes to the journey are made. So that's the opportunity now. The opportunity is to start segmenting by identity and speaking to people differently to see if we can increase value even further. Now, remember the conservation charity with the bird lovers and nature lovers and the screenshot that I showed you earlier? Well, we didn't stop at the telemarketing script. The reason why we asked identity then was to capture it so we can send supporters to a different tailored journey based on their identity. Now, this shows our online touchpoint mapping tool. And just for orientation, each column is a month, obviously, and each row represents a different identity. The different colored boxes are different touchpoints and show different channels. So blue is email, green is direct marketing, and red is a magazine. Now, you'll notice that not everything has to be different between the two rows and between the two identities. However, what is different is the copy. Everything that bird lovers receive is about birds. Images are about birds, the copy is about birds, the impact is about birds. And the same for nature. It matches their identity completely. And the other thing that is different is the kind of offers we send them. As I mentioned earlier, for bird lovers, we would mention bird watching opportunities. Or for nature enthusiasts, we would mention how they can walk in our reserves to enjoy nature. And by doing all this, we increase commitment to saving nature. So we increase their commitment to the cause. We increase their commitment to the organization, which affects retention anyway. We saw a higher proportion of members retain. More people spent, there was a higher average gift on trade products and higher average value of donations. To sum up, we all have many different identities and each has different values and goals, and it can affect our behavior when it's active. Not all identities are relevant for your cause. You need to find your supporter's identity, your donor identity. That's the reason they come to you and they support your cause specifically. Once you discover that, you can then target and tailor messages based on that identity to increase engagement and value. Now, how you discover the identity? Well, I'll admit it, it takes some work. Unfortunately, you can't guess it. I can't guess it. I need to do the work as well. There's a science behind uncovering and validating supporter identity, and it requires an insights project. But once you know it, you can use it across all your fundraising efforts to target people with that identity, and most importantly, to segment based on it. Thank you very much. I see there is one question. It's about the previous sessions, about the slides and recording. Are there any questions about this session? I'm happy to stay on a bit longer. I have a question. Can you encourage people to change their identity with your organization? I'm not sure I understand this correctly. However, the goal is not to change people's identity. The goal is to find people with an identity that matches to your cause. You're never gonna convince a vegetarian not to be vegetarian and vice versa, but you could target vegetarians if that matches your cause. I have another question. How do you rate identity versus values? Each identity has specific values and goals that are attached to it. So for example, as a parent, you want to be a good parent, you want to be teaching your kids, you want your kids to be kind, compassionate. So all of these are values that are included within a certain identity. So it's not separate. It's just that different values go with different identities. A question that, if that existed, that would help me too. Is there a good master list of potential donor identities somewhere? Unfortunately, no. For some organizations, like health organizations, the identity is more obvious than with others. So for international relief, for example, what we do is we start with a literature review to form hypotheses as to why people might support this cause, and then we proceed with an insights project to validate the identities. Can you talk more about what goes into the insights projects? Yeah, that's what I briefly described just now. It starts with a literature review about the specific cause and why people might be supporting it. And then it's, I don't want to call it a survey, but a survey is necessary. And we combine attitudinal data with giving data to see which identity predicts giving and retention better. But I can provide more information outside this webinar if you contact me directly. What about if a donor has multiple areas of interest? How would you advise their handle it from a content messages perspective? Yes, that's true, but I think that refers most to interest in areas of work. Their identity is a step before that, why they chose the cause to begin with. So I think you can focus on the top level so that you don't get into the details and the multiple segmentation of different areas of interest. What is the best way to prime an identity? How do you know what to say? There are different ways, it's true. You can do it with imagery, you can do it with copy. The main point is to have a good understanding of what the identity represents, the values and beliefs it stands for, and then you just speak to those. So like with helper identity, it was all about a sense of responsibility to people who are less fortunate. So that's the message that we were playing back to people. How many donors do you need in your donor file for this to be a realistic activity? That's a good question. We always find an identity that covers the significant majority of the donor file, so you can focus on that and start tailoring based on that. From the examples I showed, people with a connection to the disease, that was 80% of the donor file. People who were activists for the human rights organization, I think that covered like about 60% of their file. So it's a significant segment. Once we find our potential donor who identifies with our cause, how do we know if it's worth asking them to donate? Is there a way to find out which donors like our cause but not enough? Yeah, I mean, just because I have an identity doesn't mean I want to support your cause. Maybe I want to express my identity in a different way. So if I'm an environmentalist, instead of donating to a charity, I can just recycle. So yes, you're right. Having the identity doesn't mean we want to donate. However, we're currently asking people who don't even have the relevant identity to give us money, and their likelihood of wanting to donate is even lower. So it's worth asking people with a relevant identity way more than asking people without that identity. Another way to know if it's worth going into the trouble is asking for their commitment score to the organization. And that tells you if A, they have the relevant identity, and B, they are committed to your organization. They are your best prospect for any kind of fundraising activity, actually. Okay, we're right on time. Thanks all for your interest and your questions. If I haven't answered to any questions, I'm sorry. I'm gonna try and if I have your name, I can try and reach out personally, or feel free to email me with more questions. Thank you all. Bye.